Welcome to RPG Reanimators, a podcast for GMs where we dissect horror scenarios and offer our experiences and advice to reanimate them at the table. I'm Lex.
I'm Holly.
I'm Nathan.
I'm Alex.
And I'm John.
So let's see what's on the slab. The subject of this procedure is The Code, written by Christopher Lackey with Lynn Hardy for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition. In this scenario, a professor who may have made the greatest scientific discovery of all time invites his colleagues to his home for a nice little demonstration. We're also joined by a special guest for this episode, Jon Hook. Jon has been a loud, outspoken fan of this scenario for some time and is planning on making some interesting changes to this scenario that'll be featured in his upcoming game that he's running at ChaosiumCon 2025. Thanks for joining us, Jon.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I do love this scenario. I can't understate that enough. I love this scenario. It is so good and so much fun to run.
Well, we're happy to have you here. And as with any dissection, we'll be discussing all of the gross innards of this scenario. So from this point on, there will be spoilers. So if you're interested in playing this scenario, please stop here and share this episode with your GM so that they can listen and consider running this for your group. We'll also include links for where you can purchase a copy of this scenario for yourself in the show notes of this episode. So now with all that out of the way, let's begin our dissection. Okay, so Jon, I'll hit you up first. What's going on behind the GM curtain within the code?
So the code has so many different layers going on. I'm going to call him a protagonist, but we never truly meet him, is Dr. Kenneth Conley. And he has made an amazing discovery where he has invented time travel. But in the course of that, he's gotten involved with some nefarious people who are looking to take advantage of him. And he finally kind of clues in on that because I see Kenneth Conley is a little bit of a nutty professor kind of guy. And he's a little too trusting, a little gullible.
A little lovesick, isn't he?
Little lovesick. Exactly. He's a lot lovesick. And so he's very late in finally kind of figuring this out. And so he sends a message out to one of his dear friends that basically includes the secret key, the code necessary to activate and run his device, because he's put a failsafe on this time suit, which I think is really interesting that as a time travel device that the author made it a suit. It's not a vehicle or something like that, or it's not a portal, right? I think it's really interesting that he chose to make it this very weird science forward suit. But like I said, it has a key code on it, and so that code is to one of his friends. The villains. In the story, they don't actually know what the code is. In fact, they're so clueless as to what the science is. They don't understand the science, and so they get frustrated with Kenneth. And you know, it's a boyfriend girlfriend con artist, and the boyfriend kills Kenneth. Unfortunately, he kills Kenneth before they realize that he's put the lock on the suit, and he's sent a message out. And they're like, dang it, he sent the message out.
Ain't that just the way?
Ain't that just the way? And they don't know who. Like they have like their top 10, top 5 suspects of his close friends who he sent the information to. They just don't know which of these 5 it is. So they send out more letters pretending to be Kenneth, saying, hey, come to this party. We're going to reveal this special thing I've designed, and please come on out. And that's how these con artists lure all these people to come to the house because they're confident that at least one of them has the information that they need. They just don't know who it is. And so then the hijinks ensue from there. which is a great setup. I think it's a great way because Chris designed a way. That's sometimes one of the things that is the hump to get over in a Call of Cthulhu scenario is, why are these people coming together? Why do we have a hobo and a professor and a bootlegger? Why are all these different people coming together in this scenario? And so I think it was a great tool to have them be friends of Kenneth Connolly's and to have them all journey for this party. And then the Connors, it's their job to kind of sniff it out. It's a little bit not difficult, but there's some stuff that as the game master, because there's no real mystery, right? The game master is playing the role of the two con artists, and we already know who we gave the code to, because ideally when you're setting up the game, you want a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit of mistrust between the players' characters and each other. And so I tend to, when I run this, I will secretly choose one of the players and secretly give them the information, and then publicly they all get the telegram that invites them to the party. And normally, unless one of the players is marginally informed on the scenario and the setup, most of the time my players don't realize that one among them has extra information.
Yeah, I can definitely see that as an in-person game where everyone sits down at the table and you hand out what look like 5 identical pieces of paper, but then just most of them have the telegram in it. One has the letter and the telegram that hopefully if you just say like, okay, let's read these and then introduce your characters, should be enough to at least get the one player that's keyed in to not say, oh, hey guys, did you see this?
Exactly.
Yeah, the letter's pretty explicit too, of like, this is dangerous, like information, that burn the letter, don't trust so and so. Like, it's very clearly that this shouldn't be shared.
Yeah. And it's so funny how players will react to that information. I've had players who, from a meta level, they already knew that the other players at the table were potential allies, that were all the good guys, that there are no traitors among us and no bad guys among us. So as soon as all the players get together, they instantly go, hey guys, let me tell you what I received. And then they're just giving away the secret. And I was like, all right, whatever, let it go at that. He didn't destroy it beforehand. He waited until after he showed it to everyone, and then he destroyed the letter, after that. But it could go any way, but that's fine.
And this is really important for the players to try to keep the contents of this letter and the eponymous code on the down low, because one of the main NPCs in this story is Eve Pierce, or should I say Elizabeth Rowland? Or
no, you should say Claire Whitley.
Okay, there we go.
Right.
One of those. So the two con artists who are kind of the main focal points of the scenario from a GM perspective are, I'm going to refer to them as Eve Pierce, who has spent some time getting close with Dr. Connolly and has been sort of coaching him along, trying to get him to finish his research on time travel, because she feels like it will make for a good score if she can break into King Louis XIV's vault, grab the fresh painting, and then come back out to sell it later on.
Well, Lex, you're kind of burying the lead, right? She's something of a sorcerer herself and has a bit of a vested mythos interest in all of this
dabbles.
as well.
Does she though? Yeah, that one kind of caught me by surprise.
Yeah, she was actually critical in Kenneth's breakthrough in getting time travel to work, because she is a disciple of Yog Sothoth, the opener, the key, and so it was her suggestion about meditation and chanting, which was touching on the elements of Yog Sothoth, that actually got Kenneth to have that fifth dimensional breakthrough in order to actually have time travel work. And what's interesting is once he got it working, the other players don't necessarily need to have that knowledge. They can still get the suit to work. At least the way I run it, they can still get the suit to work, but because they're not using the chanting and the prayers to Yog Sothoth, suit doesn't work very well. So,
I like that. But I think to Lex's point, or I think what you're kind of getting at, Lex, is that even though she's kind of written as a sorcerer, the game doesn't really use her very effectively as such. And I'd love to get into that in the reanimation part of it.
Right. She's very much a con artist through and through, as whenever the player characters are set to arrive at the manor, Eve Pierce and her former situationship, Clint Davis, are pretending to be a third persona. Okay. Eve Pierce pretended to be Elizabeth Rowland to befriend Connolly. In the past, Clint Davis decided he would show up and pretended to be David Rowland, her brother, for a while. And Kenneth apparently was totally chill with everything and wasn't the kind of guy to ask a lot of questions for a researcher.
They don't look that much alike, huh?
Yeah, it's crazy, right? Then David got frustrated and bopped Connolly off just before Elizabeth Rowland discovered that the code Connolly gave her to power the suit was bogus. And as John mentioned earlier, they realized that, he must have sent it out to someone else. So let's get his main contacts here and process of elimination, find the code. Once they get the code to power up the suit, they plan to then bop everyone else off, and they now have a fancy time travel suit to themselves. To then orchestrate this plan, they assume a third persona, and I've got to ask questions about how easy or difficult it is to keep track of all these when we start bringing timey-wimey shenanigans into it. As Eve Pierce, née Rowland, is now taking on the identity of Claire Whitley, one of Connolly's friends or contacts who is waiting in the room when they arrive, along with William Fetter, who is Clint Davis with a shaved head, pretending to be the groundskeeper. So
kind of shaved if you look at the picture too. Kind of shaved.
I have a lot of comments on the pictures there. We're going to get into that in just a little bit. In addition to a couple of other key NPCs who Connolly has worked with in the past. Nathan, Holly, do you want to pick up with one or both of them?
Sure.
You mean the other two NPCs that are there just so the players don't go, oh, it's those two. It's got to be those two.
I have thoughts on that too, because I think the scenario is really forward as oh my gosh, there's so many little details that this thing picks up on. So Elizabeth Rowland is blonde, and every time that she was dealing with Connolly, then after all of this, she dyes her hair black to then assume the persona of Claire Whitley. So there's a little bit of, they change their appearance, they're assuming different people, and the players are brought in with 4 people waiting in the room. Is going to be Claire Whitley, William Fetter. I keep saying Willem. I guess I'm just thinking Defoe. And then, Holly?
Yeah, so we've got Dr. Seamus Quinn, a Harvard physics professor and friend of Connolly for years and years. Knew about the research he was doing, but kind of thought it was, fanciful. And, he's not a true believer. He's not one of those Miskatonic guys. And we have Diana Carlson, a high school physics teacher and former student of Connolly from Miskatonic. Both of them are listed as potential PCs, if you really need some kind of hook to bring the players in, and a potential ally, also just cannon fodder, I guess.
And replacement characters.
Exactly.
They kind of felt like roll insurance for me that, oh, hey, we happen to have 2 physicist types that if you are not getting any of the time travel-y things, they can go, oh, egad, and be able to key the players in. But yeah, the PCs are then brought into this house and sort of tasked with, I guess, looking around, investigating. How does this usually play out once players enter the house? Are there any locations in the house that are really worth mentioning?
I mean, I think there's several locations that are really worth mentioning. The library on the ground floor is very key, because that's where Kenneth did all of his note taking and all that stuff. So his giant, Sheldon Cooper boards, chalkboards are all in there. And so the library on the ground floor, the parlor where they're all kind of meeting and everything is, where all the NPCs and PCs meet each other. Clint's bedroom on the ground floor is also a really interesting spot for a nice encounter. I always have a good encounter there.
Mhm.
And then there's rooms up on the other floors. I don't want to get past the pictures. So you mentioned about the pictures. There's some great art in this scenario to include NPC portraits, but unfortunately, I have such a beef with the pictures that they have for Eve. I'm just going to call her Eve.
You
and
mean
Clint.
the totally
Yeah.
trustworthy, not dubiously suspicious portrait of the friendly NPC?
I know. They are so smarmy in those pictures. You can't use them. You show those to a player and they're going to go, bad guy right
Yep.
there.
Mhm.
You know?
Chaosium is a little guilty of doing that with most of their bad guys,
Yeah.
especially the ones that aren't are hidden, and it's like,
Yeah.
come on.
These, and especially these characters, because they have so many different personas, we should have gotten portraits for each persona and had each persona able to be presented, right? And the artist would have used the same facial features, but changed a hairstyle, changed a color, added glasses, shaved a head,
Right. Because even then, like, yes, Eve Pierce's portrait is just it's crazy. And because Eve's is so maniacal, I don't want to use any portraits, because if I have a lot of portraits except for some, then that's a bit of a weird tip off. But
Yeah.
also Clint Davis's is not current. It's the smarmy Clint with the combed back hair.
Yeah.
He's supposed to have a shaved head, but it has Eve diabolical with the dyed black hair. Sorry, this is just like, we're getting into nitpicks,
Well,
but
I have a different solution. I say go the other way, and the other NPCs need to look more nefarious, because that is a weird problem of, if you have two people that look evil and two that look like, hello, I'm Mr. Backup character. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'll be over there until you need me. Yeah, great. Awesome.
oh, I have thoughts on that too.
If you make them sketchy looking, yeah, then you're like, maybe it's
Everyone's
them.
suspicious.
Mhm.
Exactly.
The solution I came up with is I just go online and I just find new portraits for all the NPCs,
Yeah.
Right.
all of
Yep.
them, all the the ones that are benign and the ones that are evil. I get new pictures for all of them, and then it's a complete level platform. Because then that way I don't have certain pictures that look like they came out of a book, and then certain pictures that look like I found this online, right? And then there's that raises suspicion too, like, why are these not from the book, right? How do you get right? That's the other kind of a hump in this scenario, is how do you get the characters to go and basically play this giant game of hide and seek, right?
Mhm.
Kenneth is hiding somewhere. How do we find him? How do you transition into that? And that is where I start bringing in the time anomalies.
Okay.
So one of the elements that I add to my game is Kenneth needs to have some sort of unique feature about him that has an audible note to it. And so what I've chosen to do is I always make sure that he has a lame leg, like maybe he was born with a shortened leg or something like that. And so, because I got this idea from watching, of all things, Forrest Gump, right? So when Forrest Gump is a kid, he's got those braces on his legs, right? They go around his knee and it goes under his foot. And so that metallic strap under his foot, under his shoe, it has that clop, right? That sound. So I always give Kenneth one of those straps on his leg, which gives him a very distinct gait to his walk. He has a clip clop of a walk. And this mansion that he's in has marble flooring. I always just give it marble flooring, especially on the ground floor. And so there is a very distinct clip clop of him walking across this marble floor. And so when the characters are all inside the parlor at the very beginning and they're meeting each other and getting to know one another, and there's drinking and stuff going on because there's a bar in there. As that is going on, one of the PCs will hear, and I don't typically ask for a listen roll, because if I ask for a listen roll, they're guaranteed
They
to
can
fail
fail
it.
it.
Right. And then I'm just giving it to them anyways. So I just give it to them. Right.
Mhm.
I just pick someone and I say, hey, you hear something. You hear Kenneth coming to the door because of that distinct clip clop. And that will always, it has so far never failed. Whoever it is I tell that to, they go to the door and open it to greet Kenneth. Like, hey, come on in. And he's not there because they're just hearing an audible hallucination of this time vortex thing. And then after that, that's when, Clint, as the butler, comes in and says, Dr. Connolly is missing. And then everyone will, Clue style, run from one room to another, right? All the characters are going to the next room. So they all go to the library and discover, his madness written out on all these different chalkboards and the tables of notes and everything. And the time suit is propped up on a mannequin right there in the room, and so they'll be able to have the time that they need to like go through the room, search for clues, look at the notes, be it chalkboard or table notes, look at the time suit in 360, kind of be able to walk around it and discover, eventually this is where you kind of start bringing in your skill tests and everything, to investigate. But eventually someone's going to discover that there seems to be a void in the suit. Like there's a piece that's missing.
Yeah.
For those of us of a certain age, we used to have cars with a Blaupunk stereo in your car, and you could pop out the faceplate of your Blaupunk, right, to prevent it from being stolen. So that's what I always go to, because it always had this like recessed faceplate, for your stereo in your car, and then you pop that Blaupunk in. I'm truly aging myself because I installed my own in my Ford when I was a kid, but that's what I kind of describe and go to when I'm running this. And so people are like, okay, so we're looking for a rectangular piece, that would, recess into the, snap into that. And then there's all the other clues. And of course, then I have Eve in her persona suggests that Kenneth must be injured somewhere, again, alluding to he does have an injured leg, he has some sort of limitation with his leg, that maybe he's, fallen or injured. We need to find him. He's got to be here in the house somewhere or on the grounds, right? Because this is a mansion with a nearby kind of shed, shack. I mean, it's a big enough for a garage. It's a type of barn, I guess. And then the surrounding wood line. And so, people can spread out and go wherever they need to and kind of break up into groups. And I don't find it that difficult to run it with the different groups, right? I have the camera with one group for a little while, and then we move the camera to the other group, and this is where the real fun comes in. Once everyone gets split up, and you start getting into these subgroups, you can start having little vignettes of these time anomalies that start cropping up, and I like to start small and then kind of start ramping it up, getting bigger and bigger.
Right. And these time anomalies are a really, really fun element of it, because as people start exploring around the house and investigating things, what Kenneth didn't realize whenever he first tested out his suit and peeked 10 minutes into the future, then went back again, is he kind of created a bit of a ripple effect, and time is unstable around this house. The scenario gives some suggestions for different types of manifestations that could come up here in this, but generally there's a lot of room to pull all sorts of tricks and stunts on the players in there. Nathan, Holly, do you want to dive in on any of these things? Holly, I know you love timey-wiminess in scenarios.
I like, just at a really basic level, kind of categorize these anomalies as like helpful or provoking sanity loss, or like just straight up deadly, right? So some of the suggestions are like helpful. You get to meet Connolly before his death. and talk with him and gain information from him. And I love that he's kind of not even surprised to see you, because he has like this understanding that time is, a flat circle and wibbly wobbly and all of that. And then for the provoking of sanity loss, we have, seeing Connolly, but then ultimately losing him, or investigators seeing themselves in the future, or seeing themselves in the past, or seeing other investigators, but after you've already split up from each other. And I love that kind of stuff. That's just fun. And then, of course, seeing some inhuman time travelers from Earth's far, far future. And for Deadly, we have a pack of wolves hanging out in the snowy woods / hallway of the home.
Hungry wolves.
Yeah, hungry, very hungry. And of course, a crazier older version of Clint Davis attacking the investigators or Eve with an axe. It can actually, I think it actually can get a little deadly, which is fun.
And Clint and Eve have the additional task of they are trying to kind of follow the PCs around to suss out who may have this code, because they feel like someone here knows something. Eve has intentionally hidden the radio faceplate for the time machine up in the attic. And so she's just mostly trying to buddy up to these folks and suss out if they happen to know if Connolly gets to talk about it. But I think that she's also kept a little bit of an insurance policy in there. Nathan, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, it was a choice, certainly. She has added a non-specific temporal anomaly there that kind of looks like a goosh ball, but spikier, at least in the pictures we've seen. It's such an interesting choice, because she wants people to, wouldn't you want people to find the faceplate so somebody stands up and goes, well, I have the code. Aha, bang. Gotcha. So she's kind of shooting herself in the foot.
Yeah, there's like cult diagrams and things in the attic. She's like, it's padlocked, don't go up there. And so, yeah, there were choices that were made.
But also, this is a good reminder. Your cultists don't have to be sane, and they don't have to make perfect decisions, because I don't think she is either of those.
Fair. Yeah.
Those are good points. When I run it, I always, in my mind, it's always been Kenneth who's hidden the faceplate, and Eve isn't aware of it. She's aware of thing in the attic and avoids it on purpose. And I think in my mind, she always just makes the assumption like that was some sort of side effect of the suit being turned on, and using Yog-Sothoth magics and everything, and she just wants to respect it and not deal with it. And so she didn't think that Kenneth would be mad enough to put it up there, right? So he was clearly a more level-headed person. It must be someplace else, right? So in my mind, when I'm running it, she hasn't found it, so she needs these people to bring her the code and help find. That's for her. That's the real reason for doing the hide and seek game, is she's trying to find the faceplate, right? So she's hoping that gets discovered. Again, this is the way that I run it, but yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff in the time stuff.
And that's an interesting way of framing it, because there are a selection of handouts in this scenario that get kind of overwhelming seeing them all at once. As like, apparently everyone in the 1920s and 30s, according to Chaosium, kept an extensive personal diary of every thought, feeling, and emotion they ever experienced. Because there is a 10+ page handout of Kenneth's diary notes with a fun aspect.
Versions of it. Two versions of it. Yeah, if there's a downside to this scenario, it is that I think maybe unnecessarily massive, although it is entertaining, it is kind of unnecessarily massive handout. And the fact that there are two versions of it, because there's the version if you don't encounter Conley, don't encounter a version of him from his past, or your past, his future, I don't know. And then there's the kind if you do encounter him. And honestly, the game, the scenario is just more fun if at least one PC, one of the players, does have an encounter with Conley,
Yeah.
from their past, his future. And so I always, even though I have both ready, I always have that other version prepared for them to discover, right? Because they've had their encounter with him.
Yeah, that's always something, like, in reading it, I thought this was a really great detail. It's the handouts themselves are kind of overwhelming. It made me think of Masks of Nyarlathotep in terms of the info dump you find there. But I would love to try and find some way that you could have players find the diary and get the version 4 before he met them, then have him meet them, and their handout has changed as they open the book and say, like, they see that the same book now has different text.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, we as GMs can just move that stuff around so that it happens that way. I think it's, I agree with John. I think it's a critical scene to have. I don't think you should skip it, even if they don't go to Connolly's room for whatever reason. Move it somewhere else because it's an important scene.
Yeah, Alex, how do you tend to run it?
So when I run the diary, I actually kind of mix it up and let them find the one hidden in the either the barn or the garage. And when they have that scene with Kenneth, and they warn him about Liz or whoever you call her, he moves the diary, and then they can find it again in one of the guest bedroom. And when they find that diary, this is a chance for them to see like both of the handouts instead of just getting one. I just mentioned these two diaries, they both exist at the same time, but you can find yourself muddled and confused because these definitely both happen.
And I think that that's an interesting way to bring in something that the scenario kind of glosses over. It says you can do paradoxes if you want, you're on your own. But being able to have, the fun time travel thing of, I really need a gun right now. Zip back into the past, put a gun somewhere that will be hidden behind a bookcase, and then you have the tool that you need, or something like that to play a little back and forth. But it could be an interesting way to foreshadow that if you want to deal with paradoxes, you can have two of the same object at once, but you don't want them to touch, because maybe if they happen to bump the two diaries together, you can have some sort of explosive reaction or something like that to kind of prevent people from meeting themselves 5 minutes ago and giving a good old bear hug.
Yeah, I think that's important to have the different versions of it, because otherwise I would never have a PC reread a clue. Like, they just never would. You'd go like, oh, do you check the book again? No, why would I? I know what it says. It's different.
Yeah, what would you think of him trying to embed a code within the diaries? So like there's an extra code in the code. Like, John, to your note, if you were to hide the faceplate around, then that would give them a reason to look back in the journals. Like maybe it's the first capital letter or something like that to piece in together to maybe give it a little bit more investigative tilt. Sorry, this is well into reanimation, but the idea just occurred to me.
No, that's a great thought, and it's one that I hadn't thought of. I typically use the journal just as a mode for the players to get a sense of what Kenneth's life was like leading up to his discovery, and having that eureka moment, and also figuring out the people that were with him and around him, and that should give them pause. There's something we didn't really talk about is at the very beginning of this, there's suggested to have a scene at like a gas station general store, and the general store guy will make mention to, oh yeah, well, tell David was by earlier and picked up supplies. You guys must be having a party up there at the Conley mansion and everything. David was here. So he keeps mentioning David, which was the brother persona for Liz. But then there's no David when they get there. I am, because I've run this several times, I've had hits and misses with the general store thing. I'm kind of to the point where I feel like kind of omitting that scene from the scenario and just bring the characters right to the house and start there and just go from there, because I think you can still successfully run it without that opening scene.
I'd agree. It felt a little out of place to me when reading it because I just always associate it with like Friday the 13th and you're doomed.
The Harbinger, no.
Storms brewing.
It felt like a Harbinger role, but it just wasn't that. It's you're supposed to pay attention to gossip. I just felt like there's so many names to keep track of. Like as a player, I'm lucky if I can remember my own character's name. So yeah, I think I would be okay skipping it, honestly.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say run the scene, because this is a good chance to see what's going to happen later, right? So, they're going to say Davis, he's going to be there. And if for players that pay attention and take notes, right, we're going to be especially rewarded and we're going to feel good about ourselves when we do actually figure out like, hey, something's wrong, and that will give them an edge.
Your players listen to your NPCs?
Mm-hmm.
Mine just fight them constantly.
I use negative reinforcement. No,
Also, I think we've talked a little bit about Eve and Clint as being a little goofy, but not for nothing. The scenario writes them as being pretty deadly. I think that's important to highlight as well. Like Eve likes to play up this damsel in distress / femme fatale, but they will get the code by any means necessary and are not hesitant to start picking off the players one by one. So half incompetent, but also like deadly incompetent.
And so I think that sounds like a great segue into key threats or potential timetables to try and be aware of, where Pierce and Davis are by far the main threats to the PCs. And if at any time they feel that they get the accurate code, the scenario then recommends GMs just go down to the cleanup, because that's just their safe word for killing everyone else that's there. Their unsafe word.
The Delta Green cleanup sort of situation.
Yeah. And so very much that. They're just waiting until they get the code, then they mop up the rest of the people there. That way they get their time machine all to themselves. Are there any other main threats to be aware of for GMs to try to manage in the scenario? And is there any kind of timetable to keep things moving?
There are opportunities for real threat, but I think there's more opportunities for misdirection. So Holly mentioned earlier, I think it was Holly mentioned earlier, the travelers from the far future. I love this idea because they're basically these guys are just basically on holiday, and they are taking the time travel package, and they've come to see, like, going to a museum. They want to see the birth of time travel. And so they've journeyed to this time period.
To Chalix with Hawaiian shirts.
Right. Yeah. And they're just here to observe, right? And they're slightly out of phase. So they're visible to some, but not visible to others. And they've got these, crimson rods. And in the way I run it is that they're here basically tagging humans. It's like putting an ear tag on a cow, right? They're tagging humans, and they're just there to collect intellect and their thoughts and stuff and how things are going. So I can't remember how it's described exactly in the book, but I remember kind of being inspired by it. And so what I do is when the travelers, the T'Challaks from the future, and with their crimson rods, and when they ding and touch someone, that person now has invisible to everyone except for themselves, this like crimson helmet on their head that has a wire that comes out and goes to the ceiling, and then on the ceiling is some sort of like node, and it's not really a wire, it's more like an electronic arc of energy from the top of their skull to the node that's on the ceiling. And as they move around from room to room in the house, that arc of electricity, it stops and then reconnects to the next node. So they're like constantly in contact, and it is completely harmless. It does nothing other than read their minds and record their thoughts for the people in the future, but our players have no idea. They don't know what's going on. And they're like, they'll see themselves in the mirror like, what is this that's on me? And everyone else is like, what are you talking about? There's nothing on you, you know? And as they go into each new room, they see the nodes on the ceiling, and then, they get connected to it again like a leash. They're like, oh, what's going on? And they're bashing themselves in the head to try and get it off. I find that hilarious. And as other players, get, encounter the T'Challaks, and they keep getting, like blessed by this crimson rod, and now they've got a helmet on and everything. It's hilarious to see the players interacting with each other as they start getting this thing, and they can't touch it and they can't change it, they can't do anything about it, but they feel like they're doomed, right? That's fun. I always add a Hound of Tindalos.
Of course.
Mainly for the fact that it has a D20 sand loss if you fail your sanity roll. See it, right? It's like a D6 if you're successful, but it's a D20 if you fail. And I never even have the creature attack. It just is moving through the room, right? It just pours out of a corner. It stalks like a panther across the room, and then it leaps up into another corner and just exits. And just having it walk through the room is sanity blasting enough. And I find that a lot of fun too.
Yeah, I think Nathan mused in our notes about why there was no Hound of Tindalos in this scenario, because it feels right for it.
It's way at the end. They mentioned that it's like an option after they name drop a non-specific generic variety temporal anomaly, which really feels like honey, we have a Hound of Tindalos at home. And then you get there and it's what is this?
The koosh ball.
Yeah,
right?
the koosh ball. Yeah, it's like, oh look, it's got all these angles and stuff. It's not the same. It's not the same. But I definitely want to talk when we get to reanimation about that, because that's a discussion of how do you make a hound not kill everyone because they're time traveling kill beasts. They could be dangerous. I like the idea of just they're walking through. You lose your mind, but they're not going to just gut you.
I wonder if it was a case of game balance where the author was like, well, I can't sick a Hound of Tindalos on them and have Eve control them because that would be too lethal. So let me make this temporal fractal entity.
So she got a puppy of Tindalos.
Yeah, the fractal entity is really, really cool. And with the Hound, because they are predatory and they're seeking out those who have basically defiled the timeline. Usually when the creature shows up, none of the PCs have traveled through time yet, right? So the Hound isn't actually sniffing them out. They're trying to find Kenneth. They're trying to track down Kenneth. So they've kind of come through, and they're kind of pawing their way through the room because his scent is everywhere. And then it just kind of leaves, because as far as this is concerned, the humans they bear no threat to it whatsoever, right? So it will just go through the room and then maybe even look at one, and that could be super scary, just kind of staring down with a hound, and then it just kind of zips away into a corner.
Well, now that you've said that, I think now I want, as like part of the escalation clock, I want at some point for there to be a showdown with the T'Challaks and a Hound of Tindalos that the players just kind of stumble across.
Right? That would be awesome.
The tourists just getting slaughtered by wild
They have
animals.
to defend their timeshare.
Boo.
Can we talk about how cool these fractal entities are? Like, I like their mechanics where they enfold you, but the game doesn't it's just not like an insta kill, but you have the chance to get out of this grab before it temporally wipes you. And I think that's just good gameplay. Like your friends can save you by inflicting damage, or you can try and get out with a strength roll. But like even mechanically, looking at how it drains you away, it destroys your characteristics each round until you're gone, and you're just dust in the time stream.
Oh yeah, yeah, I love it.
I think that one's fun enough that it's like I'm happy throwing an NPC under the bus and having them die via that way, just for that cool scene. You know.
Well, you do have 2 people who are also.
I'd even pad it with more people. Like, let's just throw a whole bunch of people in there.
My backup.
I always describe it as basically the size of a beach ball, and when it descends, it every time I run it as an attack, it'll descend on someone from the head down, and it'll come all the way down to their hips. Now, no one is shorter from the waist to the top of your head. No one is shorter than the diameter of a beach ball. So it makes for a really weird look because dimensionally now they're inside this beach ball, which is bigger on the inside, right? And only their legs are sticking out underneath this thing, and it is comical, but also horrific of a description, where it's just human legs with this pulsing fractal beach ball right at the top of their hips, and where their head and shoulders should clearly be up and above this thing, they're not. Everyone freaks out, and then they're trying to break them out. And then if the fractal entity wins, it basically finishes its descent and goes all the way to the floor and consumes victims that way.
Little time burp at the end. Yeah, I like it.
Exactly, burp.
But it's backwards. Yeah, I feel like in the perhaps cliche vein of time becoming unraveled, I'm really envisioning that you can have these temporal anomalies start as something weird or uncanny to potentially useful, but it's feeling a bit more hectic, to the e-brake is out and you're still rolling downhill, and they're getting worse and worse, and they're getting more violent. Something that I like about the scenario is that it describes these anomalies as mostly focusing around the house. In Kenneth's diary, he's like, I saw the house in 1830 when it was under construction and people were kind of rude. And then you can have it go into the far future. I think that's where the wolf comes in, like after the house is abandoned, it's in the wild or something. And there's even one suggestion, if you want a pulpy feel, to have a dinosaur come through in some of these temporal anomalies. So I think, in addition to the PCs eventually finding the radio faceplate and inputting the code to try and pilot the time machine themselves, you can have this escalation of the temporal anomalies to keep things going, that they cannot just stop and wait in order to get that going. Because, I mean, Eve is also going to keep pushing them to try and find it, but I don't know, just trying to think of all outcomes here.
Well, that's part of the interesting part, is trying to think of all outcomes seems to be the strategy at the conclusion level. This really doesn't have a defined, like, this is the way you solve it, this is the way it ends. There's a lot of leeway of, like, I don't even know it. John, do you let people stop the anomalies, or is that not even an option in an ending?
The anomaly, I've never had anyone try to stop the anomalies. I think so far with the players that I've always had, and these are usually complete strangers at conventions, the solution that they come up with almost universally is, let's find the time suit, let's use it to find Conley to save him.
Yep.
And the cascade effect is that will set everything right. And I always go, absolutely, you're right, let's do that, which is terrible.
Yeah, I like that kind of, to me, that's the most logical conclusion, like that to what players would think to do. Like, even as I was reading this, I'm like, of course, you get the time machine, you go back in time, you save Connolly, everything is fixed. And it's kind of weird to me that the scenario basically says, like, if they do that, it's crazy. Nothing's going to be right. And also, you're on your own, keeper. And I'm like, man, really?
Verbatim. It's you're on your own. It's just
Literally
like,
quoted, you're on your own. I'm like, come on. To me, it feels like the most obvious, the most common solution that any player would come up with anyway. So I'm surprised that they're kind of leaving us hanging there on like, well, figure it out.
okay, well, we're already time traveling a little bit into the strengths and limitations part. So let's jump back and can talk about what we feel is the beating heart of this scenario, and then go back into strengths and limitations.
Well, I think the beating heart is the exploration through the house and having the different encounters. It should start out, light. You get a glimpse of somebody moving around a corner. You think you hear a sound. You look out the window and the weather is completely different, right? It's, because the scenario is set in the middle of summer and then there's a snowstorm outside. You start with little things and continue to ramp it up. The players should feel the pressure of the scenario with the frequency and severity of the time anomalies. The more often that they happen, the more deadly they become. It should really start to put pressure on the characters that we need to find Conley, and or we need to fix the suit. It always, finding Conley always seems to work out where it becomes, you know what, instead of Conley, because we think he's dead, this is normally after they've had a time encounter with Conley himself. It becomes it's less about finding Conley and more about let's get the suit working. Once we get the suit working, let's save Conley. And because now they assume that he's lost in time, not that he's been murdered. And then, if we can save Conley, we can fix all this. That is what the scenario becomes. That's the beating heart. And then the knife in the heart is, which most players see coming, is the betrayal from Elizabeth and Clint.
Yeah, that strikes me as one of the more fun things about this is the mystery at the center of it. If you took out time travel, I think it wouldn't be as much fun. But it's really just a MacGuffin that they can't open without the code. It's a decent structure for getting people in a room, having them split up, having nefarious people behind it all. Not a bad whodunit. I could see a Glass Onion movie of this.
Yeah,
I agree. I really like the setup with the multiple identities and things I just imagined a lot of finger pointing back and forth of who is who, which of course you can tease with that time travel element. So now, what would we say are the general strengths and limitations of the scenario as written? I'll go ahead and start off with strengths here.
I think it's a good one for anyone to run, first of all, because it's fun. Like the time stuff. Who doesn't love time stuff? But I think it's actually a really decent one for a new GM to tackle because you have like a single location, 2 NPCs to really worry about. The clue trail is good. There's not like leaps in logic that the players have to come to some conclusion about. I think it's good for like new players, new GMs, and experienced ones.
And if you mess up too bad, you can literally turn back time.
That's
and
true.
It's in the scenario.
Yeah, those are all real great strengths, Holly, is because it is a single location, granted with multiple rooms and stuff, but it's a single general location. I think it makes it a much easier lift for new keepers to get into Call of Cthulhu. And it is, I think, one of the best written scenarios for an introductory kind of thing. It has always struck me as a great convention setting game. But it wasn't until, before we started recording that Lex and I were talking, I would be fascinated to see this run at a slower pace where you're able to go deeper into some of the horrors and really kind of, potentially make it more personal. I will say the downside to a convention setting game is especially when it is literally at a convention, is you're time boxed, right? Most of the time, your players and yourself have a limited amount of time to run this, and you want it to finish. And so to get from the starting line to the finish line, sometimes you have to sprint. And in those cases, when you're sprinting, you're doing it at the loss of potential deeper horror, and so it becomes more of a fun, entertaining horror.
Pulpy.
Where we saw things, and it's kind of pulpy, even if you're not running it with pulp rules, but it's kind of pulpy and it's kind of interesting and it's kind of flash and bang and fun, and it's punched with scenes that you will truly remember. But I will definitely say that in my games, you're probably not coming away from one of my runs of the code going, that terrified me. You're probably coming away from one of my runs going, hey, that was fun, I had a good time. And when I'm running the code, that is usually what my target is. I'm trying to shoot for is, hey, I had a good time.
I also think because players are going to be swept up in things, a reason, talking earlier about just starting them off at the manor, having the introductions, and then with the temporal anomalies of increasing intensity, there's not really any question of what's my motivation here? Why are we even here? It's like, oh, you can't get out. I have thoughts on potentially like ways to sequester the PCs around the manor if they do decide to bolt hounds of Dindalos around the house. But there's lots of ways that you can, keep them focused there. And I think that there's a minimal risk of stalling out, which is not something I can say for other Call of Cthulhu scenarios that are very investigation heavy and really require the PCs to dig in and invest a lot of effort. So, what are some limitations that we'll address for the scenario?
I want a picture of the time machine that doesn't involve Connolly being shot.
Yeah. Just like have it on its little mannequin thing, and that would be so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's on display in the library. That sounds like a prime location to have your, like, this is what you see. That'll get your players really interested. Just kind of complaints about the pictures overall in this scenario.
Yeah,
The thing
pictures
is,
are very
nice.
spoilery.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you had the picture of the suit with the missing indent too, you could feel good when one of your player goes, "What's that? That looks like a little spot
Have
for
a
a
Blade
codex."
Runner-esque.
I was about to say, that
Yeah,
feels
I like
Blade
that. I
Runner.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I already said the conclusion kind of annoys me when, I've been reading all this stuff and then I just read "you're on your own."
And
Did you
and
already
some
say
of-
that? I thought you just said that for the first time.
Oh,
All right, get ready for a lot of that.
Well, and some of the suggestions are outright, I don't think they're very good suggestions. Like the make another temporal thing appear. Are you just going to keep dropping rocks on them till they die? Like, I'm not sure that's an interesting conclusion.
Yeah.
That was one of my unexpected critiques of the scenario while reading it. Is I feel like the scenario is a lot of great ideas that didn't exactly get panned out in terms of execution. When reading through the temporal manifestations, I was like, oh boy, wait, what? That's it? Because it's like a wolf shows up in the hallway. Okay. I think I was just expecting a little bit more spice in terms of kind of an a la carte menu for GMs to pick from for manifestations. Maybe I'm just spoiled from, Impossible Landscapes and Music from a Darkened Room. That's kind of what I was expecting, and it was fine. It felt like, since there's time travel, you cannot address every possible outcome, but I would have appreciated kind of dialing in on those a little bit more, especially as Holly mentioned, with like the most obvious choice being, let's go find Connolly whenever he had this suit on, and it just completely doesn't even try on that one.
Yeah, I kind of wanted just more time stuff. Like the temporal things feel mostly like threats. And I'm like, where's the time? Like you're suddenly transported to when this house is first being built and things like that.
That I have notes
fun.
for that in Reanimation.
Let's get to that in Reanimation.
Right. Yeah, what's the temptation, right? You want temptation.
I mean, every player that plays in this, and once they discover that there's a time travel suit, every player wants to put the suit on and wants to go through. And I allow that in every game. And it's been my experience. The players always lean into the narrative and play and accept everything that happens. So when I'm running the game, because the suit works correctly when you're using the Yog-Sothoth chant, right? Mm-hmm. Which even though they learn that, Elizabeth taught me the meditation to use when running the suit, right? They read that in the book. No one ever bothers to go, what is that meditation? And is there a copy, right? I always have a copy available, but no one ever seeks it out. No one has ever found it, and no one ever uses it. So because they're not using the meditation when they use the suit, it will fail, right? Yeah. And so they go to use the suit, and they will either travel to the end of time in its timeline, or they go to the very beginning of its timeline. And anytime that happens, these people, they just put on the suit, either one or two of them, because it is a possible two-seater.
It has a sidecar.
Yeah, shotgun.
Yeah, right, yeah. It's more like Master Blaster, right? They're up on the back. But they put this suit on, and then they just basically fade away, and then the suit comes back empty. And every time that happens, I go, your knowledge and experiences of that other player are completely gone. They've been erased from history. You don't know who they are. You guys have just completed your investigation, and now here's the suit. What do you do? And every time the next player goes, I put the suit on, because every one of them wants to put the suit on and try it out. And every time they just get eaten by time. And almost always that's how my games end, right?
That's hilarious.
That's like lemmings jumping off a cliff just in a time suit.
But listen, John, I'm the main character, and if I do it, it's going to work because I'm special.
Absolutely.
Surely the die will roll well for me.
Give me a power roll.
Everyone listens to someone in the time suit. Oh, you just go to the end of time. Skill issue. Next.
Yeah.
Yep. It's always fun. It's always fun.
That is fun. I think, and I think Seth Skorkowski talked about this a little bit in his video too. Just the
who?
Yeah, I know that guy. Who's that guy? I think that it isn't laid out. Like, does killing the suit, does destroying the suit fix everything? Does going back in time fix everything? And I mean, I guess at that point it's keeper discretion, right? Like your players come up with a solid plan. Yep, you're right. That fixed it. Good job. But yeah, I don't know. Like a little direction on that. All right. My puppet show shadow plays Lex style rant on that is done. That's bed.
I want to hear about your rant about the cars, though. What about your car rant?
It's just kind of overdone. Like, oh, we don't want the PCs to flee. Let's just tamper with their cars. That feels a little, boring, overdone, etc.
If anybody wants to leave, I'm usually fine with it, because they leave and the focus and the spotlight never returns to them. And then they realize, oh, I left the fun.
Okay, bye.
Consequences for my actions. No, I want you to roleplay me going through having shenanigans at the gas station with the Harbinger again.
You're like, well, I won because I lived. Oh.
Yeah.
I'm the main character.
Ugh.
Just eating a hot dog at the gas station going, dummies.
I do have a nitpicky limitation here, but I really just don't like the design where the journal handout, which is 10 pages long, is smack dab right in the middle of the location section.
I don't like that either.
So when I'm trying to read and find a description of what's in the room, it's just a little inconvenient when I'm flipping through the book.
It is inconvenient. Yeah.
That whole section is kind of weird, and I don't know who did the page layout for this, because you're absolutely right that the diary handouts are in the middle of locations, but even the map is out of place too. And it's refer to the map that's actually between these sections on the rooms here. It's all just kind of staggered all over the place. It'd be much better to just, it's at the end. It's all at the end. There's an appendix. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. There's also no player facing map. And not every room is labeled on the map, and so like there is a room between what's labeled on the first floor between rooms 6 and 3. Has no number, has no, you don't know what that is.
It's because
Mystery
that room doesn't exist yet.
Ooh. Temporal room.
It must be the bathroom, right? Right?
No.
It's got to be the
Like
no.
I say this
15's
all
the
the
bathroom.
time. Like I think Chaosium's general structure for layout of scenarios is really good. Like easy and because they typically follow this pattern of like you can find all the information about the NPCs, the baddies, the goodies at the end of the page, and then right after that is your handouts, and then right after that, like and so it just felt weird to me. I totally agree with Alex. It felt weird. It's like, what is this doing right in the middle of everything?
It's in the floorboards. It's in between the first and second story, so it needs to be there.
So we've talked a lot about how this scenario sort of works as we read it and navigating it within the book. Whenever we're running it at the table, though, are there any challenges that folks have tended to encounter?
So this is definitely a balancing act of how much information you can feed the players. Like, for example, how much information do you want to give at the start to just get them to suspect that something's wrong, but not enough that they're just gonna shoot everyone who is like who looks weird. So basically, in other words, like how much do you want the criminal NPCs to slip up and drop a hint? And you need to understand when to drop that hint. Because if it's too soon or too late, then that can affect the pacing of the game.
Yeah.
So, kind of similar to that, I did have a question for y'all that have run this. I am so worried at having 2 NPCs with 3 different names total that I'm just going to say the wrong one at a different time. Yes, we can do it's backwards, forwards in time, but I feel like I'm risking kind of spoiling the big reveal early on. Have you ever had any issues, or do you have any advice for how to keep track of what someone's name is when?
Right. So what I had to do this because I understand just like what information I need to run a game effectively, and I just like wrote out all the identities. I wrote out what they all look like, and I placed that on a physical sticky note since I'm running online, and I put that on my screen. So like there's no way I can miss that information because it's that important.
I think you could also like just scrub from your mind the names Eve and Clint because the players could ostensibly will never learn their real names. So like, don't even worry about those because the only people that would call them is themselves calling each other that. So I think it's more like focus on the Elizabeth, David, or whatever the hell. Oh my God, like
There you go.
William
There you go.
and
See?
Claire and William. Yeah.
Yeah, and not even worry about their real names. Like just put it out of your mind. That's one less thing to worry about.
Yeah, for me, it's always they're Claire and William, and maybe on occasion you might learn that Claire is Lizzie, and William is David, but almost never does the true ID of Eve and Clint ever come up to the point where I don't even worry about it. It's just Claire and William. Oh, and this is their other persona,
Yeah. One more thing. You definitely need to make the players care about Connolly, or at least their PCs care about Connolly, and that requires a little more TLC.
Yeah, there's no pre-gens, right? For the I don't believe there's any pre-gens.
No, it actually suggests that you use existing campaign characters to drop them into this so that they have some kind of past associations, which I don't actually recommend at all.
No. I always make pre-gens and give them backgrounds that will give them at least a bit of a hook, and then I kind of hope that the players will lean into it and say yes and go into that. But I always try and emotionally try and tie the characters in.
Yeah, I feel like you could just make them all like professors at the Miskatonic, and it's easy enough. And the colleague, and they have a little bit of that academic knowledge. And
Or they could be Connolly's family, and then you just immediately launch into Uncle Connolly's will. Oh,
Something's gone really wrong with the timeline.
If you had the time, it'd be fun to have that be part of the player's intro, is basically ask them like, why do you care about Connolly? And
Yep, I
do
like
kind
that.
of the classic leading question of, no, you care about him. Why?
That was one of the suggestions in the scenario that I really appreciated, is that if you have time, presumably outside of a convention setting, you would be able to ask each of the players, what is a memory that you cherish between you and Dr. Kenneth Connolly? Because I think that that is immense fuel for GMs to use later if they can take note of the players describing their memory, having those events trigger and happen later as part of these temporal anomalies. Is that's a no, wait a minute. And that could be a very fun way to kind of jumpstart their recognition of that was in the past and it's happening now.
I like it.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, you can play with that of them entering their own memories of, you see the guy running across on the other side of the lake saying, don't turn on the suit, don't turn on the suit. And now you remember that time you were with Professor Connolly and there was that crazy guy on the other side of the lake running and screaming something. Boy, that's a core memory.
That's a great scene.
And now again, or for the first time, let's get into reanimation. So overall, how do we want to highlight the beating, timey-wimey heart of this scenario?
To me, the most interesting thing is the temporal anomalies, the timey-wimey. That's just a personal thing for me and what I love. I kind of would want to center the scenario around that. And like, yes, of course, it's really about like the mystery of what has happened to Connolly, but kind of centering all of these weird things happening around that is what I think is a fun thing to do.
I absolutely agree. And I think that some ways I was trying to find to work that in is, one of the lulls in the scenario is this lengthy diary handout, which will mean that you're going to have people just sitting at a table going, what's it say? For 5 or so minutes each time. When instead, I think it would be much more meaningful and interesting for the certain key events in that diary entry are happening around the players. They look out the window and they see Connolly's car arriving, and Connolly and a blonde woman, maybe the window's kind of hazy, so they just see that there's a blonde woman in some kind of a floral dress step out of the car, and they may run down to meet them or something like that. This can be in their flashback. Maybe you add some details that it was raining when this happened. And so they can see things within the diary are happening around them that might make that a little more interesting and pay attention to. That's also, Holly, to your critique earlier that they've tampered with the cars is a bit tired. A way to address that and bring in some timey-wiminess is, say, in that example where Connolly and Lizzie first arrive, they may see them pull up in the car and sort of park across the driveway instead of in straight lines like the other cars. And then there's this horrible metal rending and tearing sound, like shrieking outside the house. They may run down to see what's going on, and Connolly's car from the past is fused with all of their cars in the present, literally parked through them as a way to disable them. And like they can see his, maybe as a vanity plate or something that they can recognize sticking out of the front door of one of their other cars as a way of, oh, these time anomalies are happening and they can be dangerous, as an initial tip-off there.
I really love how you're leaning into the time aspect and how you just described making these journals interactable by turning them into like flashbacks or like glimpses into the past. To highlight the beating heart of the scenario, I would definitely lean into all that makes time travel cool. Bring in like parallel versions of NPCs, PCs, throw in different creatures or environments from different points in the timeline, and you can just get creative with it, right? I'm gonna go into this later, but like you could definitely get really weird with the PCs and backup PCs.
Yeah, looking forward to that discussion.
Yeah, I like that idea a lot. Actually, I'm going to remember this and use it when I'm running this at ChasmCon 2025, where the scenes from the journal, you could play them out, but you could have it be almost like a distorted video, filled with artifacts where it's the scene that you're seeing isn't 100% clear, because you wouldn't want to give away and have them see, Claire as Lizzie, see her face and everything. So just have it so that the characters are really distorted, almost like, trying to watch Cinemax when you're a kid and you didn't have that channel. And so, you're just getting, vague impressions of these people, and you can clearly make out, Kenneth's silhouette, his gait, as I talked about earlier, giving him a distinct gait to his walk and everything. And you can hear his voice, but maybe it's a little bit garbled, a little bit modulated. So that would be the excuse on why other characters that the PCs aren't that familiar with are kind of are unrecognizable, right? As they're interfacing with them. But that's a super great idea. I would really like that. I'm going to pull that into what I'm using.
I like that. And as you were describing it, my mind is sort of going to iterations of time travel or echoes that I've seen in movies and things. And usually there's that, hello, there's echoing, or maybe it's garbled like static. But thinking of static as I would like if there is some sort of subtle indication that the time travel is happening. Like maybe there are little glints that it looks like shining dust in the air whenever it's nearby. That can be an environmental detail that you can add, that maybe they hear Connolly walking up to the door, and whenever they open it, they just see the shimmering dusty hallway where he's not there.
That's perfect.
So then players will get freaked out if they enter a room and they can see this kind of dust is coming up behind them or something like that. And then by the end of it, it's everywhere. And maybe that's how it's...
Yeah, or add a J.J. Abrams lens flare. Right in your eyes. Like,
yeah. And then I think that can make sense too, that as time goes on, that the manifestations become clearer. And so that's why whenever you're not worried about spoiling things, that's when you bump into him right off the bat.
Bada bing.
Yeah, and if you wanted to have the other NPCs, if you wanted to play with the crime element of this a bit more, the other NPCs aren't very suspicious. You could use those time bits to maybe introduce the idea that, oh, they stopped by the other day and they, were asking Connolly for money, or there's some other motivation they might have to get rid of him. Because as it is, they're just kind of there. They're just along for the ride.
That is true. That's really...
I mean, they're hardly there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. You have this other professor whose name just totally escapes me because that's how insignificant these people are.
Seamus Quinn.
Who understands what Connolly was researching. And you could play it up as being like, oh, yeah, that was all preposterous, but make it suspicious, right? Like, oh, does this guy really think that this person's research was preposterous and not possible? Is he a competitive academic looking for a breakthrough himself, that kind of thing,
So you're touching on one of my ideas exactly, is I think to try and flesh out these NPCs a little bit more, it'll be important to give them potential conflicting motivations and not just be generally good patsies to have around and be role insurance. I loved the idea of Quinn being, perhaps he's struggling to get grants. Like he is, I mean, especially right now, academics are very much struggling to try to get any edge that we can. And so he wants to take this time machine and he's just going to call it his own. He's taking notes on all of the formulae because he's going to slap his name on it later. He wants to take the machine, and he isn't just a good, helpful bumpkin along the way. So maybe they may suspect him as being a criminal element. Also, too, I felt really bad that Diana Carlson just had kind of no role. She's there. She's like, she's a grad student. That's it. And that was where I noted, maybe in the flashback, that Lizzie had a floral dress, that you can mention that Diana has black hair and is wearing a floral type dress. because one of the clues you find is there are some black drips on the floor, which is where Eve has dyed her hair from blonde to black. And so maybe Diana also dyes her hair to cover up those grays that keep coming in, because that's what happens whenever you work in academia. So you have that as a little bit of a fake out there. Maybe her dress may look similar, and you can have, I love the idea of like their past echoes whenever they go to the house for some more manifestations to make them more interesting and cast some more suspicion on, can all of these people actually be trusted?
I like the idea even that Diana, as his former grad student, maybe was around at the beginnings of his research, but she doesn't know a lot. But you can kind of play it like, is it that she doesn't know a lot, or is it that she's not telling us that she's not telling us all of the things that she knows? So maybe she was kind of there in the very beginnings and really truly doesn't have a lot of information, or only has like a small piece of maybe sort of consequential information. But you can play it as a GM to make that a little bit more suspicious.
Yeah, if they're watching like a flashback, they're seeing one of these, time anomalies, and these what we thought were innocuous NPCs are involved. Maybe, Conley and she were sharing tea, and then she spills her tea. Conley has to leave. They're in the library, right? They're in the library. She spills the tea. He has to leave to go and get something clear. She quickly takes out a notebook and is copying down his formulas from his book, because she's there purposely to try and she spilled her tea on purpose.
Yeah.
Knowing that he would go and try and clear, because she's trying to steal his formulas and ideas, because she doesn't have any of her own.
Oh, or actually, in the vein of men taking credit for women's ideas, what if it's just the opposite? And that there is an argument that you encounter because a lot of the initial calculations and formulae that Connolly was working on were actually Diana's. And that there may be a notebook or something, and then that's where you get a big conflict that she's like, no, you stole my idea. And so it's like maybe Connolly used a little bit of Yog-Sothoth glitter to take it that final step forward, but that's another way to invest some more conflict, and that Diana will have a vested interest in securing the time machine, and maybe she could anticipate that something could be wrong because there isn't really a steering wheel.
I love that. That is great. I want to use that too.
I genuinely like the idea that all 4 NPCs have their own reasons for wanting whatever the hell it is that Connolly has. So at that point, it becomes like 4 kind of warring interests against whatever the PCs eventually find out, like, oh God, Connolly's been killed and we need to save him. And everyone else is like, I just want the damn machine or whatever this research is. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. That's more work for the GM.
I have a talent
and
for
it's
that.
Only really relevant if you want to play up the crime.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
If
absolutely.
you're just there for
don't
the time travel.
If you want to do the crime, you got to deal with the time.
Yeah, it depends on how you want to fine tune your game, really. Like, for example, if you want Connolly to be able to be saved at all, then yeah, go for it. For example, right? Connolly's dead. You can have him come back if you want to sacrifice something, like it might come at a great personal cost of your PCs to get Connolly back, or you could get Connolly back, but he's just completely mentally shattered. Depends on what you want with the tone. Or you can just get him back and he's fine.
Yeah, and tone-wise too, just as we were talking about it earlier and how they've, accidentally killed him and whatnot, this is so close to like Casper or Flubber or like one of those 90s level things where it's like, oh yeah, they're obviously the villains and you've got the friendly time traveler, maybe even the temporal anomalies, like a little bouncy thing that comes and hangs out with you.
Now,
what's that, Spiky?
In my mental movie of this, Kenneth Conley is definitely going to be played by Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, exactly. See? Well, now they're all going to be Eddie Murphy.
Yeah, all the NPCs are Eddie Murphy. Yeah.
In different costumes.
Time travel with the clumps.
Oh, no.
But that is also with the those little travelers that I feel like the travelers, I like the way you were talking about it, John, where they're still kind of threatening, because otherwise they really are almost too goofy if you're going for a serious tone of just like they're there with their space cameras going, hey, cool, look at this. It's the wildlife. And the investigators stand there like, that thing just stole my wallet and disappeared. Like, what just happened? Well, they wanted the souvenir. Yeah.
So I had an idea on how to use the T'Challaks in a slightly different way, because it did feel really, I mean, intentionally spurious within the scenario itself. And the way that the write-up is kind of vague on how much the suit can travel through time and space, it mentions just as a bit of a throwaway within Connolly's diary. And I was thinking, it describes the T'Challaks as, you know, being a little curious about this time warpage going on here. So whenever they first show up, they're kind of taking photos, and they're more kind of like civil engineers who are surveying the scene because this is about to get out of hand.
Yeah.
And the suit is powered by essentially some sort of a crystal or something it's going to be its main power supply. And if you were to use it, you know, as long as the crystal's nearby, you can fill up the gauge and zip around, but eventually it needs to recharge and is fixed in place. So the next time that the T'Challaks come in, they are going, actually, you know what, this is pretty bad. We're going to do a little bit of a cleanup here, set up some cones and lights. And they start packing up this crystal into kind of like a briefcase travel container or something, and they're about to leave with it. The PCs are going to have a vested interest in, or at least Eve is going to have a vested interest in not letting them escape with the power supply for the time machine. So you can have a little bit of an incursion, a conflict there to try and secure that. This will let someone wear the suit and take the power supply with them to conceivably do whatever the fuck they want with their new time travel suit and the little backpack if someone wants to have uppies for the +1. If they don't, then the suit essentially has enough juice for like 1 or 2 jumps. And if someone does manage to put it on, they're kind of going to be stuck wherever it leads them. I also had other ideas with how to steer the suit, but that was sort of it with the T'Challaks for me.
They just jump back to when they had the battery and take it then.
And this is what gets
me. And the T'Challaks shoo them away.
Well, then I mentioned with the paradox thing. And I have a question for y'all who have run this, because I feel like since only one person can really put on the suit and kind of steer, it feels like everyone else has to sit on the sidelines while shenanigans happen. And I'm curious how you handle that in play at the table. Or is that just more of the climax that they actually get the suit and can use it at that point?
I definitely think it's a climax kind of thing. The game is nearing to its end, so I mean that is a good point.
Yeah, I agree. It's a climax. It's a climax event, and as I said earlier, my players almost always are completely in on sacrificing themselves. They just want to hear how entertaining it would be to get into this thing and have time go poorly for them, and how they get stretched to infinity and disappear.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because that was one of the ideas where I was chatting with Holly before this discussion about how to handle whenever they go back and try and rescue Connolly in that moment. I talked about it earlier with the 2 diaries, that to me, with time paradoxes, is multiple versions of the object can exist in the same kind of spectrum. But if they come into contact, it's almost like a fission reaction where these atoms are being torn and put back together again. So they go boom. And in the case of, they could go and rescue Connolly, and he may have a duplicate of the time suit, but if the suits themselves ever touch, that is like a reality warping singularity, and they may inadvertently trigger a game over in there. Just something for GMs to maybe consider, and how to handle paradoxes and multiple versions coming in contact. Alex?
If I wanted to run rescuing Connolly, right? We did discuss that the suit does have 2 slots. They could probably go back to a point in time where Connolly is. It might even be an alternative version of Connolly and just be like, all right, strap in, whoop, and then we're gone. However, that does make a good scene if two people use the time suit and go back to Conley's time. It's like, oh, we can't. We need to leave someone here because there's only two seats on this. So that would be interesting to play out for sure.
It'd be interesting to play out as well is the, investigator A goes back in time and finds Conley and wants to convince him to jump on the suit. And then investigator B also shows up, right? And so now you have two different investigators trying to convince or have all of the investigators each in their own suit, because from different timelines, each of them got into a different suit. They all arrive at the same period, and they're all vying to convince Conley to get into their suit, come into mine, come back into my timeline.
I love that so much.
And then
don't trust him. He's a liar.
Only the one PC who's able to convince Conley to jump in and go with him is the one that survives, and all the other ones get pulled into infinity.
Nice.
That's a great climax.
That is awesome.
I know for a fact that Alex would shoot my time machine.
Oh, instantly.
Alex would shoot everybody else.
Every time someone may jump to go back and get something, then whenever they come back, a different PC will shoot them. And so the suit is just going to have more and more like viscera and gore all over it, and just bullet holes, as everyone gets a suit at some point in time.
That's hilarious. I love that.
To make that scene a little more confusing, you could describe all the PCs just a little bit differently than what they look like. So there is no right answer.
Oh my God. Or you have the different players are taking on that PC at different points in time. And so you would be playing, say, if you have Jim, Chuck, and Davis, is like, okay, Jim, you are Chuck 40 years in the future with this time suit trying to correct a terrible mistake.
Yeah.
Oh, but before we get too carried away here, John, I know that you had mentioned that you are converting this scenario to focus not in the 1920s and 30s, but within a more gaslight setting that you are going to run in Chaosium Con. Can you tell us about how you're doing that?
Yes, I would love to. All right. So my thought was I want to lean more heavily into H.G. Wells' Time Machine kind of aesthetic, right? So instead of it being a time suit, it is going to be a time vehicle, just like we're familiar with the George Powell Time Machine movie. And I'm using from the brand new Cthulhu by Gaslight Keeper's Guide, there's some floor plans for different types of buildings. And so I'm resetting it. Instead of being in a country estate, like a mansion, it's going to be a London town row house, right? So you're in the heart of London, and it's a multi-story, townhome. The vehicle be in the basement, but it'll still be the same kind of setup, and characters will arrive by carriage, and there's really nothing stopping you from leaving except the time anomalies have already started. And so beyond the doors, you don't know if you're going into prehistoric times or anything like that. I'm going to keep the T'Challaks, but I'm also going to bring in Morlocks. So I'm going to have Morlocks. They're going to be where in my games, the T'Challaks are very much more benign. They're slightly out of phase with you, so they can't really be hurt or anything. I just make them more of observers, and they, like I said earlier, they're kind of like ear tagging humans by putting these like weird transparent helmets on them and everything. That'll still happen, but the Morlocks, they will be an actual physical threat that you could encounter. I'll have the Morlocks in there. And instead of it being the code, because I didn't really think that a digital numeric device fit in a gaslight setting, I'm going to go with, and I'm actually retitling the scenario from the code to the crystal key. And so you need to find the correct crystal key. Apparently, there's a bunch of these crystal keys all throughout this place. And
wouldn't you have it, Dr. Connolly is a crystal key collector.
And so in preparation for this scenario, I went online and I purchased a tuning fork.
Oh.
And I'm bringing a tuning fork to the convention. And so the way that you find the correct crystal key is with the tuning fork. This will be the secret information that the one player has, instead of it being a code of any sort. Is you need a tuning fork, and then by striking the tuning fork and having it near the crystal key, the correct one, the crystal of that key will begin to glow with an inner light. And that is the proper key. But Lizzie or Claire, she doesn't know that. And she doesn't know that she needed a tuning fork. And so it'll be the one player who has this secret information and brings a tuning fork to the party, and is beginning to like strike it and try and find it.
Yeah.
Once they find the actual crystal key, they'll be able to go and put it into the ignition box of the time machine vehicle itself. But I'm going to have, obviously, Kenneth will still be dead, but instead of him being buried out in the forest, which in every scenario I've run of this, no one ever thinks to go and try and find his body. I'm going to actually have him buried under a pile of coal bricks, lumps of coal in the basement, right? And so if any of the characters choose to search in there, they'll be able to find his body buried under the lumps of coal.
That actually brings in a really good point that I kind of noted and then filed away somewhere. Is it's really unlikely that PCs are going to look into Kenneth's death at all. And, it even says, yeah, if they can pass an extreme spot hidden roll and dig through the forest to try and find it in there, then they can find his buried corpse. I think it would be very helpful to have a manifestation where they see the echo of Davis shooting Connolly, because I think that it is very fair that new players are going to assume that Connolly is lost somewhere in time, going whoa, in and out of sync, and being able to see him get got might lead them to try and find his body. Maybe that could be a place that you could have a couple of other floating clues to put in there.
Absolutely.
So the great thing about this time travel and leaning into that is that you can make a lot of GM facing information into player information by showing this manifestation, right? Like your idea of Davis just shooting Kenneth like right on the property. That'd be a good scare, it'd be a good shock when they see that echo of it happen. You can even have the player characters relive the flashbacks as they're happening. Alternatively, if you want to make it easier without doing the flashback things, just move the location of Kenneth's body to be on the property itself and have there be signs like fresh dirt.
I kind of want to find some way to have his body be in the library, because it's such a theme with a lot of time travel things. Is it was right there in front of us the whole time. And there was a really fun detail in this where you're supposed to note where the pictures are within the sitting room and the library, and in the flashbacks they're in a different order, and that there is a picture that is in the library that actually was in the sitting room before. It feels almost like something out of Saturnine Chalice, because if they pick up the portrait off the wall, they'll see that there are some bullet holes in the wall that Pierce and what's his name put there to cover up. This feels like a lot of work for a GM to try and note this, because there's so many little details to keep track of. But I think in the spirit of what Alex is recommending, I fully agree. And it can be very helpful that if you as a GM have noted some detail, find a way to bring that in later so that players can still get that feeling and experience of, holy shit, I was already here, but this thing was just behind it, or I didn't notice that this is what I was looking for the whole time. It should help deliver that time travel-y package.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so excited to run this. I love running the code, and I'm really excited to be running it as a Gaslight scenario. I think it's just going to be perfect for it.
Yeah, I'm so excited to play it. Wait,
Great. Just the steampunk of it all is gonna be fun. Like, if you can't
Yeah.
have fun, that I mean,
Yeah.
okay.
I'm looking for. I like I said, I've also created the pre-gens, and I'm excited for my pre-gens. I've got Kareem Nasir, who is an astronomer from Morocco, and
Cool.
is a former companion of Kenneth's. You know, they kind of studied together for a while. I have another Elizabeth. But just because I love the name, but I have Elizabeth Chenoweth, and she's a poet, but she had a romantic relationship with Kenneth, but it was
Nice.
broken up because of another NPC, or another PC, not NPC.
Ooh.
So another player can be playing Mama Adele Taputu, who's from Tahiti. She's a medium, and she, you know, in reading the cards, the tarot cards, advised Kenneth that he needed to break off a relationship that was not going well, but she misread the cards, and so she was actually reading our Lizzie Pierce as the bad relationship, not Elizabeth Chenoweth. And so, and Mama Adele, she will have no qualms about saying, look, it was for Kenneth's own good that I advised him this way, and she didn't realize that she was misreading the cards.
Wrong.
And then I've got two others. I've got a Captain Richard Snow, who is a naval captain, and in my Gaslight version, Kenneth's leg injury happened when he was serving in the Navy aboard a one of the newly commissioned Ironside ships, and there was an explosion in the magazine, and so he got injured. Several people died, many more were injured, to include Kenneth, and so he got discharged after that, and now he has a leg injury from that. And then the fifth one is going to be a professor mentor of his, who will come in and be available. But I've got these 5 PCs that can kind of interact with each other and everything.
That's really fun, and they're all really dynamic. I particularly, I'm latching on to the tarot card reader that you mentioned before, because I think that that could be a nice way to hint that Connolly was not opposed to trying atypical methods to come to conclusions. Like, the meditation aspect felt very kind of off the wall to me, and I was just like, why? But it makes sense for him to have bought into that from Lizzie, because he had already consulted tarot to try and get some guidance. Maybe he'd already tried to do palm readings or other stuff like that, that could be interesting to key in for that too.
You were talking about this woman who reads tarot, and my mind immediately goes to like seances, and I think that could also be like a fun avenue for characters to pursue if they found out that Connolly is dead.
Because that could be a fun thing for a fake out too. That was one of the ideas. I didn't have any ways to really capitalize on it, but I always love giving players a fake out so that they think that it is one thing. So, you mentioned hearing Connolly in the hallways. I thought it's very easy to make time travel look like ghosts.
Yeah.
And that they could think that the house was haunted until they run into themselves, as ways to bring that together.
Wait, I'm not dead.
Or
yeah, something's wrong here. Now, John, what you'd suggested with, getting out of a relationship for these cards, I have an even dumber idea. What if Connolly is super hot and an eligible bachelor?
Oh,
and all the PCs are love interests that he's been like told to get away. So they're all fighting at the end of the day to make sure he ends up on the timeline with them.
Connolly is the himbo through time.
So tonight we're gonna find out the code to Connolly's heart.
Oh no!
Nice. Is love blind and able to travel through time?
Yeah.
Nice. I will not be using those ideas.
Oh. But you, listener, don't let your dreams be dreams. Don't let our dreams be dreams, please.
Remember, every NPC could be hot.
That's a way to make them care about Connolly.
That is true.
He's
that
just
is actually
himbo.
a good point.
You're giving me an idea. Like, Yeah, there's plenty of ways to make Connolly likable as an NPC to really
Mhm.
drive that motivation forward. Just as Nathan said earlier, you can just ask like, "Hey, why does your player character like Dr. Connolly? What is the cherished memory you have between one another?" You can kind of match up occupations. So with a soldier character, you can have Connolly be a soldier in the past. Obviously, you have that relation with them being a professor at the Miskatonic for the academic types, or maybe they just share the same hobby. Ask them leading questions like, "Did you survive the war together? Did he save your character? Or was he a mentor? How did you meet at a social event and take up a good friendship?" And
Mhm.
then when you finish doing that, you can actually use that as ammo for future scares. Like, for example, a war character, a soldier character with Connolly, he can start to hear artillery shells, like that same night that Connolly rescued him. There can be shell fragments, or um, there can be ghost sounds of the lecture that you met Connolly at in a convention. Really, it's pretty limitless.
It's kind of like interstellary, not to get too spoily, where you could have Connolly.
Please, that movie came out in like 2010. You're good.
Well, I don't know. Maybe some people are a little slow behind the times, but Connolly could have been pushing behind the scenes to make sure everybody ends up here tonight. It's time travel. You can have all kinds of fun with it.
Holly, this is so stupid, but my brain finally caught up with your idea. What if Pierce is trying to host a seance to get the code from Connolly's ghost? That's the whole gist.
I like it.
And seances is one of the notes in the new Cthulhu by Gaslight Keeper's Guide. It gives guidance on how to run a seance.
Nice. I know good friends of Jackson Elias had a really interesting episode on seances and how they used to be more of just kind of an all evening entertainment event. It wasn't like Ouija board going around. That's very modern, but it was, I mean, apparently a lot of ghosts could play piano because it was more entertainment than anything. And that's kind of, people were there for a show. But in that vein of having this performance aspect and unique elements to it, John, I thought that your idea of incorporating the tuning fork to get the crystal tuning at the right frequency is really great. I was struggling with ideas for how to bring in some actual props and things to the table on this one. I'm curious if y'all have any ideas for modified handouts or props that you would want to make, aside from new custom portraits for everyone at different times.
And a time machine picture.
Oh, and a time machine picture.
I was just going to bring my time machine from home.
I just make one. You know?
I think it just works as it is. And honestly, I think the point that you guys made earlier of like, you don't even have to do the handouts as handouts. You could do them as like scenes from the past is really powerful. I think that you
More
don't really
engaging.
need much here.
Yeah, have the players live it, right?
Yeah, that was because I hate whenever scenarios have handouts that are just in cursive and not actually written. I wrote all of the journal entries out as plain text. I can upload in the show notes of this. That way, too, if you want to change any elements of that, you can take it.
God bless you.
Then just put it, as cursive on paper, handout, give that to your players, too.
I'll tell you something I want to do with this scenario, just because I like the anomalies. To me, just personal preference. I think they're at their most fun when you're playing around with people in time. And so I would like to see like echoes of the house as it was, 100 years ago. And you have people walking around in these old clothes. I want to see echoes of the house as it will be in the future. So they walk into a room and there's like a teenage boy at a computer, and to me, it's like, don't be afraid to go forward. Right? Like I see you laughing, Lex. I know what's on your mind.
They find a teenage boy. Oh my God, close the door.
Exactly.
Closing computer windows.
The idea that, that the T'Challaks are kind of fun. And you had my brain spinning a little bit there, John, where like even just a tour group of people from like the year 2200. So they look like people, like average people, not even these like crazy creatures from the future. And it's just like, and here in the library, you can see the first use of time travel, and everyone's taking their pictures.
Or
and,
they're like HGTV house flippers and like, oh, this has got to go.
But I even like the idea of like, as things become like ramped up and become crazier and crazier, that time becomes corrupted and the anomalies don't make any sense anymore. So you have like people dressed like Gaslight era, but they're talking about, the 2020 election or something like that. Or, there's a phonograph, but it's playing Britney Spears. And, I just like that kind of stuff where it's time just
That
slowly
is really
corrupts.
cool.
Yeah.
That is a great idea. I like that.
John, you got to have wax cylinders that are playing Wannabe by Spice Girls.
Yep. Yep. That's awesome. I love it.
It really feels like there's kind of no end to what you can add or change on this scenario. It's what I was getting at earlier. Like, it's a lot of great ideas,
Right.
even though on paper the execution doesn't deliver as much as I may have really wanted. There's as much room in this as you can put in effort, honestly. It's kind of the sky's the limit. Are there any ideas to try and expand the scenario into a continuation, if you would so choose?
You could definitely have this be the start of a time travel campaign. So, like, they have a time travel suit, and assuming that they get out of everything successfully, they will still have it. So you could send them to like any time or place, alternative or even parallel, to start a new time travel adventure. So imagine like players going back in time and then coming back to find out that they're in like Robert W. Chambers, the Imperial Dynasty of America, right from the Repair of Reputations. That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's pretty limitless.
Oh, or you just gave me an idea that you could have that classic in time travel investigation hook. It's making me think of, what's the movie where the one person with the time machine goes off and then they find a letter dated at 1870 or something. I need you to go to the library at this location at this time. And that whoever just fucked off in the time suit, they may be gone, but then the rest of the PCs are then sent on a chase to try and find clues that they left for them in the past. And those clues could then seed them into other Call of Cthulhu scenarios or campaigns or what have you. As maybe the other person was just lost through time, but eventually they stumble into other shenanigans.
Yeah, wasn't it the end of Back to the Future 2, and the delivery guy shows up with the letter. I was told to be here at this time to deliver this to Marty McFly, and the boys downtown, they didn't think it was going to happen. And the guy in the PC in the time suit disappears. The postman shows up and delivers a letter saying, meet me at this location at this time.
You're going down darker trails at that point.
Yeah. Super cool. Yeah, this entire scenario is just it's made of clay, and you can mold it in any fashion that you want. And I love it because it is absolutely, in my opinion, a evergreen scenario. It will always be relevant and usable.
I think you could honestly set it at any time or place. Like, you could set it modern day and like it would still be the same. Like, modern technology isn't going to help you here anyway. So if we're talking about extension to the scenario, the Great Trap is another good timey-wimey Call of Cthulhu scenario. I'm not sure about extension, but also in the same vein at the very least. Like, the Great Trap is quite good. And more modern timey-wimey, Spilsbury number 9485 from the Fear Sharp Little Needles collection, which is kind of where I got the idea of like corrupted time, because it's a timey-wimey scenario, and as the PCs fail to like solve the mystery, as they're dragging their feet, like time becomes more and more and more corrupted, and that's kind of like a ticking clock for them. So that kind of made me think of that.
Boy, wouldn't it be great if we had an episode where you discussed your edits and thoughts for this scenario, Holly? Wouldn't it be great if that's episode 33?
Thank you, Lex.
I'm going to go back in time and make it.
Watch me give Lex more work. Wouldn't it be great if that was in the show notes?
What?
Are there any other notes or thoughts that we would want to talk about with this scenario?
John, I was wondering if you had any favorite war stories or
Oh.
events that have happened when you have run the code in your many runs.
Oh my gosh. So some of my favorite scenarios have ended with when the fractal entity is descending on some of the different characters. I've had players succeed in the opposed strength roll to extract themselves out of it, and then it has landed on someone else, and they failed, and so they've been consumed.
That's funny.
They the players typically end out in a shootout, and they end out killing Lizzie and David up in the attic and everything, and they leave them. The PCs will run away, the survivors, that is, they'll run away and let the fractal entity eat Lizzie and David and get rid of their bodies, and it always ends out. I've had some players, trying to remember, because not every game has ended where everyone just basically dies in the time stream. I had somebody who was successful in finding Kenneth, because I always think it's possible for them to find Kenneth, and I always make it really difficult when they're trying to use the time suit without also trying to implement the Yog Sothoth chant. But in this one, they were successful, but I'm failing to recall exactly how it ended. But it was so much fun, where basically the house was destroyed and it just kind of crumbled, by being, time quaked or whatever to death. And it was just a basically a lobotomized Kenneth Conley that was recovered. And so he was basically, brainless, and the house was gone and all their stuff was gone. And the suit just kind of evaporated at the end of it. And it was a very
Lovecraftian
interesting ending. Yeah, very Lovecraftian ending.
John, something you said there just gave me the dumbest accidental solution, best case solution for this. If you have the temporal anomaly eat Eve Pierce and eliminate her through all time, everything stabilizes. Connolly is downstairs and he's struggling to invent the time machine. Yeah. And they accidentally stabilized everything. It's just an uncommon way to short circuit what's going on.
That is super awesome. I don't know why I didn't think of that. Well, I was very involved in what was going on at the table, so yeah. That's pretty awesome.
We hope our deranged utterings are helpful in bringing this scenario to life at your table. Be sure to check out the show notes of this episode for links on where to get a copy of this scenario for yourself, any RPG resources we can share, actual plays of this scenario that we recommend, as well as an invite to our lab's Discord server to discuss more reanimations. We also post these episodes and resources to our Patreon that's free to follow, or if you like, you can make a charitable donation to help us keep the ominously flickering lights on at the H. West Memorial Mortuary and Laboratories. We'd also like to give special thanks to John for joining us here today. Where can people try to track you down with torches and pitchforks?
Perfect. Yes. So Seth Skorkowski and I have a podcast called Modern Mythos. And actually this month of April is our, I want to say, 3rd year anniversary.
Oh, congrats.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun. We enjoy doing this show. We just recently put out a review of the new Cthulhu by Gaslight Keeper's Guide. Seth and I will also both be in attendance at this year's Chaosium Con. So you can find me at in Ann Arbor this year. So please come up, say hi. And I always love meeting and talking with folks about Call of Cthulhu. And I'm not really, I'm on Facebook, but pretty much that's in Discord. Modern Mythos has a Discord channel, so I'm always trolling that. So please come and say hi on Discord as well.
I'm looking forward to meeting you in person, John, at Chaosium Con. We're all going to be there too.
Yay. Well, let's see if we can get a game together, or at least share a meal, share a drink.
That'd be great.
So
that sounds great.
I also wanted to note that I have run the code for the internet. I ran it. I can't remember if you were in that game, but I ran it for the Into the Darkness crew. And so I don't have the link handy right now, but it is available on the Into the Darkness website.
I will travel to the future through the most mundane means possible, find that link, and then add it into the show notes of this episode.
Yep. It was a multi-part game, so I think it's in like 4 sessions, I think.
There's
4
an
or 5
amazing
sessions.
moment in there where one of the PCs tries to like romance Eve.
Nice.
Oh yes,
Yeah,
I totally forgot
I was
about
watching
that.
that like 3 years ago, and that's still a good memory. Like, oh, I'm here for the dating opportunities or something like that.
Yes.
I'm like, what?
Yeah, I totally forgot about that. That's hilarious.
So until next time.
Thanks for listening to RPG Reanimators.
Where your games can die.
Or live.
On the table. Or just Chaosium, because maybe they're not playing Call of Cthulhu, they could be playing anything.
Like RuneQuest. Ugh.
Like
Who would
RuneQuest.
play
Oh,
that?
who does that?
RuneQuest. I'm just saying RuneQuest. I
Nathan
want to play
loves
RuneQuest.
RuneQuest.
It's so cool.